Welcome back. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let your thoughts drift. Tonight, we gently step into the world of Neville Longbottom. There are stories in the wizarding world that speak of chosen ones, of prophecies and destiny. Stories of young wizards marked by fate to stand against the darkness. But tonight, we explore a different kind of story. A story about a boy who was never chosen by prophecy, never marked by dark magic, never given any special destiny. A boy who chose himself. A boy who proved that true courage does not come from being selected by fate, but from deciding to stand up even when every part of you trembles with fear. His name is Neville Longbottom, and his journey from a frightened, clumsy child to one of the bravest heroes in wizarding history is a story worth telling in full. When we think of Neville, many images come to mind. Perhaps it is the round-faced first year, constantly losing his pet toad, stumbling through his classes, shrinking under the harsh words of professors and classmates alike. Maybe it is the young man standing in the room of requirement, wand raised, learning defensive magic alongside his friends. Or perhaps it is the warrior we saw in the final battle, face bloodied but defiant, pulling an ancient sword from a burning hat and destroying the last piece of the darkest wizard's soul. Neville was all of these things. His story spans from a tragic beginning through 7 years of growth, self-discovery, and ultimately heroism that saved the entire wizarding world. To understand Neville Longbottom, to truly grasp the full picture of who he became and why his story matters so deeply, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the summer of 1980 to July 30th, when a baby boy was born to Frank and Alice Longbottom. They named him Neville. From the moment he entered the world, his life would be touched by both incredible love and unimaginable tragedy. He would grow up in the shadow of heroes, constantly compared to parents he could not remember, constantly feeling he would never measure up. But that shadow would not define him forever. Neville Longbottom would step into his own light, and when he did, the entire wizarding world would see him shine. Neville Francis Longbottom was born on July 30th, 1980, to Frank and Alice Longbottom. The date itself is significant, though few knew it at the time. He was born as the 7th month died, just hours before another baby boy would be born the next day, a boy named Harry Potter. Both children entered the world during the darkest period of the First Wizarding War, when Lord Voldemort's reign of terror was at its peak. Death Eaters attacked without warning, families disappeared. Fear gripped both the wizarding and muggle worlds. Into this chaos, Neville was born. His parents were remarkable people. Frank Longbottom worked as an auror for the Ministry of Magic, one of the elite wizards trained to hunt down and capture practitioners of the dark arts. Alice Longbottom was also an auror, equally skilled, equally brave. They were not just colleagues, but partners in every sense, fighting side by side against Voldemort's forces. Both Frank and Alice were members of the original Order of the Phoenix, the secret organization founded by Albus Dumbledore to combat Voldemort when it became clear the Ministry alone could not stop him. They were respected throughout the wizarding community, known for their courage, their skill, and their unwavering dedication to fighting evil. In the first moments after his birth, something remarkable happened that no one witnessed. Baby Neville adjusted his blankets with magic, settling himself more comfortably. It was an unusually precocious display of magical ability for a newborn, but the midwife assumed Frank had tucked his son in more snugly. This tiny moment of accidental magic would be forgotten, overlooked, and years later, Neville's family would spend a long time wondering if he had any magical ability at all. The Longbottom family was ancient and respected, They were purebloods, one of the sacred 28 families listed in the pureblood directory. But unlike some pureblood families who look down on muggleborns and half-bloods, the Longbottoms did not share such prejudices. Frank and Alice fought to protect all magical people, regardless of their heritage. This made them heroes to many and targets to Death Eaters who believed in pureblood superiority. Shortly before Neville was born, something else happened that would shape his entire life, though he would not learn of it until he was 15 years old. A prophecy was made. Sybil Trelawney, a witch with genuine seer abilities, despite her often scattered demeanour, went into a trance during a job interview with Albus Dumbledore. She spoke words that would change the course of history. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. 2 families fit the criteria of this prophecy. The Potters, with James and Lily expecting a baby in late July, and the Longbottoms, with Alice also expecting her baby in late July. Both couples had defied Voldemort 3 times and survived. Both were members of the Order of the Phoenix. Both were expecting sons who would be born as July ended. When Harry Potter was born on July 31st and Neville on July 30th, both became possible subjects of the prophecy. Either boy could be the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord. A Death Eater named Severus Snape overheard part of this prophecy and told his master. Voldemort became obsessed with eliminating this threat before it could grow. When both boys were born, he had to choose which one to pursue. He chose Harry Potter, perhaps because Harry was a half-blood like Voldemort himself, or perhaps for reasons unknowable. That choice made Harry the subject of the prophecy. But it also meant that Neville Longbottom would grow up never knowing how close he came to being the chosen one, never knowing that his life could have been completely different if Voldemort had made a different decision. For the first year of Neville's life, things were as normal as they could be during a war. Frank and Alice loved their son deeply. They worked to keep him safe, even as they continued their dangerous work as Aurors. Neville's grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, was part of his life from the beginning, a stern but loving presence. At some point early in Neville's life, his grandfather died. Neville witnessed this death, though he was too young to fully understand it. Years later, this would mean he could see Thestrals, the skeletal winged horses visible only to those who have witnessed death and processed what it means. Then, in late October of 1981, everything changed. Voldemort went to Godric's Hollow to kill Harry Potter. He succeeded in murdering James and Lily Potter, but when he turned his wand on baby Harry, the killing curse rebounded. Voldemort was destroyed, his body disintegrated, his soul torn and barely surviving in a less than spectral form. The wizarding world celebrated. The war was over. The Dark Lord was defeated. People danced in the streets, sent shooting stars into the sky, rejoiced that the terror had finally ended. But for the Longbottom family, the nightmare was just beginning. A group of Voldemort's most fanatical followers refused to believe their master was truly gone. They were convinced he was still out there somewhere, diminished but not destroyed. These Death Eaters decided they would find Voldemort and restore him to power. But they needed information. They needed to know where he was, what had happened to him, how they could help him return. They knew that the Aurors Frank and Alice Longbottom had been instrumental in capturing and imprisoning many Death Eaters. They thought perhaps the Longbottoms knew something about Voldemort's whereabouts. So they decided to make the Longbottoms tell them everything they knew. The attack happened when Neville was about 16 months old, barely more than a baby, still learning to walk and speak. 4 Death Eaters found Frank and Alice Longbottom. Their names were Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband Rodolphus Lestrange, his brother Rabastan Lestrange, and Barty Crouch Jr. They captured Frank and Alice and took them to an unknown location. What happened next was one of the most horrific acts of cruelty in the entire war. The Death Eaters subjected Frank and Alice to the Cruciatus Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses. This curse causes pain so intense that most people cannot bear it for more than a few seconds. But the Death Eaters did not cast it once and stop. They cast it again and again and again for hours. They tortured Frank, demanding information he did not have. When he could tell them nothing, when he remained loyal even under unbearable agony, they turned to Alice. They tortured her the same way, trying to break her will, trying to force information that simply did not exist. Frank and Alice Longbottom did not break. They did not betray anyone. They did not give up any secrets. But the prolonged torture with the Cruciatus Curse did something worse than kill them. It destroyed their minds. The continuous, relentless pain shattered their sanity beyond any hope of repair. By the time Aurors found them and arrested the Death Eaters responsible, Frank and Alice were no longer themselves. They could not speak coherently. They could not recognize anyone, not even each other. They were lost inside their own minds, trapped in a fog of insanity from which they would never emerge. The 4 Death Eaters were given a trial before the Council of Magical Law. They showed no remorse, no guilt, nothing but fanatical devotion to Voldemort. They were sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban, the wizard prison guarded by Dementors, creatures that feed on human happiness and create an atmosphere of complete despair. Frank and Alice were moved to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, placed in the Janus Thicky ward, a closed ward for permanent spell damage. They would spend the rest of their lives there, cared for by healers but never recovering, never knowing who they were or who they had been. And Neville, not yet 2 years old, went to live with his grandmother. He was too young to remember his parents as they had been. He would never have memories of his mother holding him, of his father playing with him, of family meals and laughter and love. His parents became strangers to him, people he visited in a hospital, people who looked at him with empty eyes and gave him chewing gum wrappers without understanding why. Augusta Longbottom took custody of her grandson and raised him as her own. But she carried her own grief, her own anger, her own determination that Neville would somehow make up for what had been lost. She wanted him to be like Frank, to live up to the legacy of his heroic parents. And Neville, growing up under that weight of expectation, would spend years feeling like he could never be good enough, never be the son and grandson they deserved. Growing up with Augusta Longbottom was not easy for young Neville. She was a formidable woman, stern and demanding, with very specific ideas about how a Longbottom should behave. She dressed distinctively, always wearing green robes, a fox fur scarf, and a remarkable hat topped with a stuffed vulture. She carried a large red handbag and had a presence that made even adults nervous. Augusta loved Neville in her own way, but she was not warm or openly affectionate. She believed in discipline, in upholding family honor, in living up to the Longbottom name. From his earliest memories, Neville knew about his parents. Augusta made sure of that. She took him regularly to visit Frank and Alice at St. Mungo's, often during Christmas and other holidays. These visits were painful for everyone involved. Neville would see his parents in their ward, vacant-eyed, not recognizing him. His mother Alice would sometimes give him chewing gum wrappers, a small gesture that might have been some deep instinctive recognition of their connection, or might have been nothing at all. Augusta would tell Neville he should be proud of his parents, proud of what they had sacrificed. But it is hard for a child to feel proud when what he mostly feels is sad and confused and alone. Augusta often compared Neville to his father, and Neville always came up short in these comparisons. She would tell him that Frank had been brilliant at magic, that Frank had been brave and strong, and everything a wizard should be. She frequently mentioned to others that Neville was not as good as his father, that he was not living up to his potential, that she did not know what Frank would think of how his son was turning out. These comparisons were meant to motivate Neville, to push him to be better. But for a child already insecure and uncertain, they had the opposite effect. They made him doubt himself more, made him feel like a disappointment, made him believe he would never be good enough. The worst part, the thing that hung over Neville's entire childhood like a dark cloud, was that for years, his family feared he might be a squib. A squib is a person born into a wizarding family who has no magical powers. They are not muggles because they know about magic and can see magical places and things, but they cannot perform magic themselves. For pure-blood families especially, having a squib child was seen as shameful, a sign that the family bloodline was weakening, and Neville showed no signs of magic. Other young wizarding children would have accidental bursts of magic when they were emotional or frightened. They would make things float or change colors or cause small explosions. But Neville did nothing. Month after month, year after year, no magic appeared. His family grew increasingly worried and frustrated. Here was the son of two powerful auras, a boy from an ancient magical family, and he could not manage even the smallest bit of accidental magic. Neville's great-uncle Algy took it upon himself to force magic out of the boy. Algy was determined to prove Neville had magical ability, but his methods were shocking and dangerous. He believed that if Neville was put in enough danger, his magic would activate to save him. So Algy repeatedly tried to catch Neville off guard and put him in life-threatening situations. Once, he pushed young Neville off the end of Blackpool Pier. Neville nearly drowned before someone pulled him out. No magic appeared to save him, but Algy did not stop. When Neville was 8 years old, his great-uncle came to visit for tea. At some point, Algy took Neville upstairs and held him by his ankles out of an upstairs window, dangling him over the garden below. It was meant to scare magic out of him. Then Algy's wife Enid offered him a lemon meringue, and Algy, distracted by the dessert, let go. Neville fell from the window, plummeting toward the ground, where he would surely have been badly hurt or killed. But in that terrifying moment, Neville's magic finally activated. Instead of hitting the ground hard, he bounced. He bounced all the way down the garden, bounced out into the road, and landed safely without a scratch on him. The relief was enormous. Augusta cried with joy. The family celebrated. Neville was a wizard after all. He could do magic. He was not a squib. The shame and worry that had hung over the family disappeared. To celebrate and perhaps apologize for his extreme methods, Uncle Algy gave Neville a pet toad named Trevor. Neville loved Trevor immediately, and the toad would become his constant companion for years to come. But even though Neville had proven he possessed magic, the damage to his self-confidence was already done. He had spent his entire childhood being told he was not good enough, being compared unfavorably to his father, being put in danger by family members who doubted him. He had internalized the message that he was a disappointment, that he was weak, that he probably could not live up to the Longbottom name. These beliefs settled deep into his heart and mind, and they would take years to overcome. In the years leading up to Hogwarts, Neville's family continued to apply pressure. Augusta had specific expectations for what Neville would achieve at school. She wanted him to follow in Frank's footsteps, to be brilliant at magic, to make the family proud. She talked about his father's accomplishments constantly, making sure Neville knew the standard he was expected to meet. She told him about how Frank had excelled in his studies, how Frank had become a respected aura, how everyone had admired Frank. Every story was another reminder that Neville had a lot to live up to and probably would not manage it. Despite this pressure, or perhaps because of it, Neville remained a gentle, kind child. He loved plants and showed an early interest in herbology, finding comfort in nurturing growing things. Plants did not judge him or compare him to his father. They simply grew if you cared for them properly, and Neville was very good at that. His great-uncle Algie, perhaps still feeling guilty about his extreme methods of testing Neville's magic, occasionally brought him unusual plants. These gifts delighted Neville and helped him discover his true talent and passion. When Neville's 11th birthday approached in the summer of 1991, his Hogwarts letter arrived. It was official. Neville Longbottom would attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry starting in September. Augusta immediately began preparing him, buying his school supplies, giving him advice and warnings, telling him what she expected. She gave him a remembrall, a magical sphere that turned red when the person holding it had forgotten something, though frustratingly, it did not tell you what you had forgotten. It was a practical gift for a boy who was often forgetful, but it also reminded Neville that his grandmother saw him as someone who needed such help. The day came to leave for Hogwarts. Neville arrived at King's Cross Station, pushed through the barrier to platform 9 3/4, and boarded the Hogwarts Express. He was nervous, clutching Trevor the Toad, worried about what awaited him at school. On the train, disaster struck almost immediately. Trevor escaped from Neville's grip and hopped away. Neville spent much of the journey searching for his toad, asking other students if they had seen him. This search led him to a compartment where he met a girl with bushy brown hair named Hermione Granger, who helped him look for Trevor. She also introduced him to a boy named Harry Potter, though Neville did not yet understand the significance of that name. When the train arrived at Hogsmeade Station, Neville joined the other first years in boats that carried them across the Black Lake toward Hogwarts Castle. The castle rose before them, magnificent and ancient, lit by thousands of windows reflected in the dark water. It was beautiful and terrifying. Neville wondered what house he would be sorted into, whether he would be good enough, whether he would embarrass his grandmother and disappoint the memory of his parents. The first years entered the castle and gathered in an antechamber near the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall explained the sorting process to them. They would put on the sorting hat, and it would decide which house they belonged to. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin. Each house had its own qualities, its own history, its own reputation. Neville hoped for Hufflepuff. Hufflepuff valued hard work and loyalty, traits Neville felt he could manage. Gryffindor valued bravery, and Neville did not feel brave at all. He felt scared and small and certain he did not belong. When his name was called, Neville Longbottom walked forward on trembling legs. He sat on the stool, and Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on his head. The hat began speaking directly into his mind. It saw everything about Neville, all his fears and doubts, but also something deeper. The hat wanted to put Neville in Gryffindor. It saw potential for courage there, hidden under layers of insecurity. But Neville begged the hat not to put him in Gryffindor. He did not feel brave. He felt terrified. He asked for Hufflepuff instead, somewhere he might fit in better, somewhere the expectations would not be so high. The Sorting Hat listened to Neville's request. In other circumstances, it might have honored it, but the hat saw something Neville could not see in himself. It saw that Neville needed to be in Gryffindor, that being surrounded by courage might help him find his own. So despite Neville's protests, the hat shouted Gryffindor. Neville walked to the Gryffindor table, feeling he had already failed, already been placed somewhere he did not belong, somewhere he would surely prove himself inadequate. Neville's first year at Hogwarts was difficult in many ways. He shared a dormitory with 4 other boys: Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Dean Thomas, and Seamus Finnegan. They were all friendly enough, but Neville felt like the odd one out from the beginning. He was constantly losing things, forgetting things, struggling with basic spells that seemed easy for everyone else. Trevor the Toad kept escaping, and Neville would have to search the castle for him. His remembrall glowed red frequently, but Neville could never remember what he had forgotten until it was too late. The classes were challenging for Neville in ways they were not for most students. In Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, he struggled to turn matches into needles or transform beetles into buttons. His wand never seemed to work quite right, which was not surprising since it was not truly his wand. Neville was using his father's old wand, passed down to him by Augusta. She had given it to him as a way to honor Frank's memory, but wands are particular things. The wand chooses the wizard, and Frank's wand had not chosen Neville. Using a wand that was not properly matched to him made all magic harder than it should have been. Potions was even worse because of Professor Severus Snape. Snape was the head of Slytherin House and the potions master, and he seemed to take particular pleasure in tormenting Neville. In their very first potions lesson, Snape asked Neville questions he could not answer, mocked him when he stumbled over the responses, and made him feel stupid in front of the entire class. This pattern continued throughout the year. Snape would call on Neville specifically when he knew Neville did not know the answer. He would criticize Neville's potions harshly, sometimes vanishing them entirely. He would deduct points from Gryffindor because of Neville's mistakes. Why Snape targeted Neville so intensely was something Neville did not understand. Years later, the truth would emerge that Snape had been the one to overhear the prophecy about Voldemort's defeat and tell the Dark Lord about it. Snape had not known the full prophecy, had not known that it would lead to Lily Potter's death, the one person Snape had truly loved. Snape blamed himself for Lily's death, lived with guilt every day. When he looked at Harry Potter, he saw both the woman he had loved and the man he had hated. But when he looked at Neville Longbottom, he saw the boy who could have been the chosen one instead of Harry. If Voldemort had chosen Neville, Lily Potter would still be alive. Snape resented Neville for this possibility, even though Neville had no control over it and did not even know about it. Flying lessons were nearly disastrous. Neville had never been on a broomstick before, and the idea of flying high off the ground terrified him. During his first flying lesson, Madam Hooch was teaching the first years how to mount their brooms and kick off gently. But Neville's broom malfunctioned, or perhaps sensed his nervousness and fear. It took off before Neville was ready, shooting up into the air with Neville clinging desperately to it. He rose higher and higher, unable to control the broom, too panicked to remember any instructions. Then he fell. He fell from quite a high height and hit the ground hard, breaking his wrist badly. Madam Hooch took Neville to the hospital wing, leaving the other students on the grounds. While he was gone, Draco Malfoy found Neville's remembrall, which had fallen from his pocket during the chaos. Malfoy mocked Neville and kept the remembrall, leading to Harry Potter having his first flying experience by chasing Malfoy to get it back. Neville's clumsiness and fear had inadvertently revealed Harry's natural talent for flying, though Neville felt only embarrassment about the whole incident. But despite all these struggles, Neville showed flashes of something important. Herbology was the one class where he consistently did well. Professor Sprout taught herbology, and she noticed immediately that Neville had a natural gift for working with magical plants. His hands were gentle and careful. His attention to detail was excellent, and plants seemed to respond well to his care. In herbology, Neville was not the clumsy, forgetful boy everyone saw in other classes. He was competent, knowledgeable, confident. Professor Sprout praised his work, and those moments of praise were precious to Neville because they were so rare. Neville also formed friendships, though he often felt on the edges of groups rather than at the center. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were kind to him and included him when they could. But they also had their own adventures and secrets that Neville was not part of. Still, having friends at all was important. Neville had lived a somewhat isolated childhood with his grandmother, and being surrounded by peers his own age, people who did not constantly compare him to his father, was a relief. As the school year progressed, strange things began happening at Hogwarts. There were whispers about the Philosopher's Stone, about someone trying to steal it, about danger lurking in the castle. Neville did not understand most of it, but he noticed his friends sneaking around at night, being secretive, clearly involved in something important. On one particular night, Neville noticed Harry, Ron, and Hermione preparing to leave the Gryffindor common room after curfew. He had no idea what they were planning, but he knew it was against the rules. Neville did something then that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood in front of the portrait hole, blocking their exit. He told them they should not go out, that they would get caught, that Gryffindor would lose more house points because of their rule breaking. Harry, Ron, and Hermione tried to convince him to move, but Neville refused. He was scared, his voice shaking, but he stood his ground. He did not want his house to get in more trouble. He did not want his friends to get hurt. So he tried to stop them, even though they were the only real friends he had, even though standing up to them was terrifying. Hermione, frustrated and pressed for time, cast a spell on Neville, the full body bind curse, which froze Neville completely, leaving him unable to move or speak, though he remained fully conscious and aware. Neville fell backward, stiff as a board, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione stepped over him and left. Neville lay there on the common room floor, unable to move, feeling hurt and betrayed, but also oddly proud that he had tried. Eventually, other students found him and lifted the curse, but by then, the night's events were over. What happened that night would turn out to be the climax of Harry Potter's first year at Hogwarts, the confrontation with Professor Quirrell and Lord Voldemort. Neville knew nothing about any of it. But what happened a few days later would change how Neville saw himself. The end-of-year feast arrived, and everyone gathered in the Great Hall to learn which house had won the House Cup. Slytherin appeared to have won with a commanding lead, but then Dumbledore began awarding last-minute points. He gave points to Ron, to Hermione, to Harry, for their bravery in protecting the Philosopher's Stone. These points brought Gryffindor nearly level with Slytherin, but not quite ahead. Then Dumbledore spoke about Neville. He said that there are all kinds of courage, that it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, but just as much to stand up to your friends. He awarded Neville Longbottom 10 points for his courage in trying to stop his friends from breaking the rules. Those 10 points put Gryffindor ahead of Slytherin. Gryffindor won the House Cup, and it was because of Neville. The entire Great Hall erupted in celebration. The Gryffindor table went wild with joy, and Neville sat there, shocked and overwhelmed, unable to believe that he had done something important, something that mattered, something worthy of recognition. For the first time in his life, someone in authority had told Neville he was brave. Not his grandmother saying he should be like his father. Not someone pointing out how he fell short, but a genuine compliment, an acknowledgement that Neville had done something courageous. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but for Neville, it was enormous. It planted a seed of possibility in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he belonged in Gryffindor after all. Neville returned to Hogwarts for his second year, with a bit more confidence than he had left with, though he was still fundamentally the same nervous, clumsy boy. Second year brought new challenges that in some ways were worse than first year. Strange things were happening at Hogwarts. Students were being petrified, turned to stone by something lurking in the castle. Messages appeared on walls, written in what looked like blood, warning that the Chamber of Secrets had been opened and enemies of the air would be purged. The atmosphere at Hogwarts became tense and frightening. Students whispered about the heir of Slytherin, about who might be behind the attacks, about who might be next. Neville, like many students, was terrified. He was a pureblood, so the message about purging enemies of the air should not have applied to him. The attacks seemed to target Muggle-born students, but Neville had so little confidence in his magical abilities that he feared he might be attacked anyway. He bought a large purple crystal that was supposed to protect him from the monster in the Chamber of Secrets. When other students pointed out that as a pureblood, he was unlikely to be targeted, Neville responded that even Mrs. Norris had been attacked. And besides, he was so bad at magic, he might as well be a squib. This comment revealed how deeply Neville still doubted himself. Despite Dumbledore's words at the end of first year, despite proving he could do magic, Neville still saw himself as inadequate, as barely qualifying as a proper wizard. The fear and insecurity that had been instilled in him during childhood had not disappeared with one moment of recognition. Classes continued to be a struggle. Professor Lockhart was teaching defense against the dark arts that year, and while he was less cruel than Snape, he was also completely useless as a teacher. The only practical things students learned in defense that year came from a disaster when Lockhart lost control of a cage of pixies, and the students had to figure out how to deal with them themselves. Neville ended up hanging from a chandelier by his ears, trapped by particularly mischievous pixies who thought tormenting him was great fun. It was humiliating and painful, and it reinforced Neville's belief that he was not cut out for this kind of thing. Herbology remained his sanctuary. In Professor Sprout's greenhouse, Neville knew what he was doing. Second-year students learned to repot mandrakes, magical plants with roots that looked like ugly babies and whose cries could be fatal to anyone who heard them. Neville handled the mandrakes confidently, carefully repotting them while wearing earmuffs to protect against their screams. He also learned about many other plants, both helpful and dangerous, and he absorbed everything Professor Sprout taught him. In herbology, Neville felt competent. It was the one place where he was not the worst student in the class, where he could answer questions correctly, where he felt like he belonged. The mystery of the Chamber of Secrets dominated the year. Eventually, it was revealed that the heir of Slytherin was actually a memory of Tom Riddle preserved in an enchanted diary, controlling Ginny Weasley and using her to open the chamber. Harry went down into the chamber and faced a basilisk, an ancient serpent whose gaze could kill. He destroyed both the basilisk and the diary, saving Ginny and stopping the attacks. Neville learned about all of this after the fact, along with most of the school. Once again, Harry had been at the center of something dangerous and important, while Neville had simply been a student trying to survive the year and pass his classes. When third year began, Hogwarts was once again dealing with a crisis. Sirius Black had escaped from Azkaban prison, the first person ever to do so. Black was supposedly a dangerous mass murderer who had betrayed Harry's parents to Voldemort. The entire wizarding world was searching for him, and many believed he was trying to get into Hogwarts to finish what Voldemort had started by killing Harry Potter. Dementors were stationed around Hogwarts to guard the school, floating dark figures that drained happiness from everyone near them. Neville found the Dementors terrifying. Everyone did, but for Neville, who already struggled with anxiety and fear, the presence of Dementors made everything worse. They brought out his worst memories, his deepest fears. When a Dementor came onto the Hogwarts Express on the first day back to school, Neville felt its effects acutely, though not as badly as Harry, who actually fainted from the encounter. Third year brought a new defense against the dark arts professor, Remus Lupin. Unlike Lockhart, Professor Lupin was an excellent teacher who genuinely cared about his students and wanted them to learn. He noticed quickly that Neville was struggling with confidence, and that much of his problem stemmed from fear rather than lack of ability. In one memorable lesson, Lupin introduced the class to a boggart, a shape-shifting creature that takes the form of whatever a person fears most. When it came time for students to face the boggart one by one, Neville went forward nervously. The boggart transformed into Professor Snape, revealing that Neville's greatest fear was the potions master who had tormented him for 2 years. The class laughed, but not unkindly. Professor Lupin taught Neville to use the ridiculous charm to make the boggart funny instead of frightening. Neville imagined Snape in his grandmother's clothes, complete with her stuffed vulture hat, her fox fur scarf, and her red handbag. When the boggart Snape appeared in this ridiculous outfit, the entire class burst into genuine laughter. Neville had done it. He had faced his fear and defeated the boggart. Professor Lupin praised Neville for his success and even gave him points for Gryffindor. It was another moment of validation that helped build Neville's confidence bit by bit. Lupin recognized something in Neville that few other teachers had seen. He saw past the clumsiness and forgetfulness to the courage underneath. He made a point of encouraging Neville throughout the year, never making him feel stupid for asking questions, always treating him with respect and kindness. The year was also notable for what happened at the end. The truth came out that Sirius Black was actually innocent, that he had been falsely imprisoned for 12 years for crimes he did not commit. The real traitor was Peter Pettigrew, who had been hiding as Ron's pet rat. Neville learned all of this along with the rest of the school, though the full story was complicated and not widely believed outside a small group who knew the truth. What mattered to Neville was that once again, Harry had been involved in something extraordinary, while Neville remained on the sidelines. But something was shifting in Neville during these years. Small moments of success were accumulating. Dumbledore had recognized his courage in first year. He had succeeded against the boggart in third year. Professor Sprout consistently praised his work in herbology. These moments were like drops of water slowly wearing away at the stone of his self-doubt. He was still insecure, still clumsy, still struggling in many classes. But deep inside, something was beginning to change. Fourth year brought the Tri-Wizard Tournament to Hogwarts. Students from 2 other magical schools, Beauxbaton and Durmstrang, came to stay for the year. 3 champions were selected to compete in dangerous tasks, 1 from each school. But something went wrong, and Harry Potter ended up as a 4th champion, despite being underage and not having entered his name. The tournament dominated the school year, and students took sides about whether Harry was a cheat or a victim of circumstance. Neville believed Harry. He never doubted that Harry was telling the truth about not entering his name. This loyalty to his friend showed growth in Neville's character. He was learning to trust his own judgment, to stand by people he believed in, even when others questioned them. Before the second task of the tournament, where champions had to retrieve something precious from the bottom of the lake, Neville helped Harry in a crucial way. He gave Harry information about gillyweed, a magical plant that would allow Harry to breathe underwater. Neville's knowledge of herbology, his area of genuine expertise, proved valuable and important. But fourth year was also when Neville learned the full truth about his parents. In defense against the dark arts class, taught that year by someone they believed was retired or a Mad-Eye Moody, the students learned about the unforgivable curses. These were 3 spells so terrible that their use earned an automatic life sentence in Azkaban. The Killing Curse, which caused instant death. The Imperious Curse, which allowed the caster to control another person completely. And the Cruciatus Curse, which caused unbearable pain. When the teacher demonstrated the Cruciatus Curse on a spider, making it writhe and scream in agony, Neville went pale and shaky. He could barely watch. After class, the teacher noticed Neville's distress and took him aside to talk. Later, Harry learned from Dumbledore what had happened. The teacher had explained to Neville about auras and their work, about catching Death Eaters and the dangers they faced. This conversation led to Dumbledore revealing to Harry, and Harry learning that Neville's parents were still alive, but in St. Mungo's hospital, driven insane by prolonged torture with the Cruciatus Curse. Harry had not known this about Neville. Almost no one at Hogwarts knew. Neville had kept this painful truth private, perhaps out of shame, perhaps because it hurt too much to talk about. But now it was known to Harry and to a few others, and it explained so much about Neville, why he lived with his grandmother, why he sometimes seemed so sad, why watching the Cruciatus Curse demonstrated on a spider had affected him so deeply. His parents had been destroyed by that curse, their minds shattered beyond repair, and Neville had grown up visiting them in a hospital ward, unable to have any real relationship with them. The end of fourth year was traumatic for the entire school. Cedric Diggory was killed in the final task of the tournament, murdered by Peter Pettigrew on Voldemort's orders. Harry witnessed Voldemort's return to physical form, watched the Dark Lord perform a dark ritual using Harry's blood. When Harry returned with Cedric's body and told everyone that Voldemort had returned, many people did not believe him. The Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, refused to accept it. The Daily Prophet began a smear campaign against both Harry and Dumbledore, painting them as liars and attention seekers. But Neville believed Harry immediately. He knew what Death Eaters had done to his parents. He knew that followers of Voldemort were capable of terrible evil. When many students turned against Harry the following year, believing the propaganda in the Daily Prophet, Neville stood by his friend. His grandmother Augusta also believed Harry's testimony about Voldemort's return. She cancelled their subscription to the Daily Prophet, saying the newspaper had gone downhill, and that if Dumbledore said Voldemort was back, then he was back. This show of trust and loyalty from his grandmother meant a lot to Neville. Fifth year began under dark circumstances. The Ministry of Magic had installed a new defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts, a woman named Dolores Umbridge, who was also serving as the High Inquisitor, giving her authority to inspect and interfere with other teachers. Umbridge refused to teach practical defensive magic, insisting that students only read theory from textbooks. Her reasoning was that there was no threat, that Harry and Dumbledore were liars, that everything was perfectly safe. She made students write lines as punishment, using a special quill that carved words into the back of their hand as they wrote, causing both pain and permanent scarring. It quickly became clear to many students that they were not learning anything useful in defense against the dark arts. If Voldemort truly had returned, if Death Eaters were active again, they would need to know how to protect themselves. So when Hermione suggested forming a secret group to learn practical defensive magic taught by Harry, Neville was one of the first to sign up. He went to the first meeting at the Hog's Head pub in Hogsmeade, along with about 24 other students. They called the group Dumbledore's Army, or the DA for short, both in honour of Dumbledore and as an act of defiance against Umbridge, who feared Dumbledore was building an army. Dumbledore's army met in secret in the Room of Requirement, a magical room that appeared only when someone needed it and transformed itself to suit their needs. Harry taught the group everything he knew about defensive magic, from basic shield charms to advanced spells like the Patronus charm. For Neville, these lessons were transformative. Harry was patient where Snape had been cruel. He encouraged rather than mocked. He believed in his students and wanted them to succeed. Neville threw himself into learning defensive magic with determination he had never shown before. Perhaps it was knowing that the same people who had destroyed his parents might be out there again. Perhaps it was having a teacher who actually believed in him. Perhaps it was simply that Neville was maturing, growing into himself, finding his courage. Whatever the reason, Neville improved dramatically in the DA meetings. He learned spells that had seemed impossible in classroom settings. He dueled with other students and held his own. He was becoming a capable wizard. Before Christmas, in 5th year, Neville had an experience that was both painful and eye-opening. He went with his grandmother to visit his parents at St. Mungo's Hospital. While they were there, Harry, Ron, and Hermione happened to be at the hospital visiting Ron's father, who had been injured. They saw Neville in the Janus Thicky ward with his parents and his grandmother. It was awkward and uncomfortable for everyone. Neville had never wanted his friends to see his parents like this, to witness his pain and embarrassment. Alice Longbottom approached Neville and pressed something into his hand. It was a chewing gum wrapper. Augusta dismissed it impatiently, telling Neville to throw it away. But Neville did not throw it away. He never threw them away. He kept every wrapper his mother gave him, saving them even though she did not recognize him, even though the gesture might mean nothing. He kept them because they were all he had of his mother, these small scraps of paper that she gave him with some instinctive sense of connection, even if she did not know who he was. Augusta spoke sharply in the ward, telling Neville that he had nothing to be ashamed of. His parents were heroes who had not given their sanity, so their only son would be ashamed of them. She said he should be proud. Neville was proud of his parents, but pride and grief are not opposites. He could be proud of what they had done and still deeply sad about what had been taken from them and from him. Seeing Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they made Neville feel exposed, vulnerable, like a private pain had been made public. But his friends were kind and respectful, and they never mentioned it to anyone else, or made Neville feel bad about it. This visit to St. Mungo's happened shortly before a bigger crisis. In January, Death Eaters, including Bellatrix Lestrange, the woman who had tortured Neville's parents into insanity, escaped from Azkaban prison. 10 Death Eaters broke out in the first mass breakout in the prison's history. When Neville learned that Bellatrix Lestrange was free, that the woman responsible for destroying his parents was out there somewhere, something hardened in him. He became even more dedicated to his training in Dumbledore's army. He practiced spells until he got them right. He pushed himself harder than he ever had before. Then came the night in June that would change everything. Harry had a vision planted in his mind by Voldemort of Sirius Black being tortured in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic. Harry was convinced Sirius was in danger and was determined to go rescue him. Hermione and Ron agreed to go with him. When they could not contact any members of the Order of the Phoenix for help, they decided to go themselves. Neville found out what they were planning and insisted on coming along. Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood also insisted on joining. So 6 students flew to London on Thestrals, the skeletal winged horses visible only to those who had witnessed death. Neville could see the Thestrals clearly, having witnessed his grandfather's death when he was very young. They landed in London and made their way into the Ministry of Magic, which was deserted at night. They went down to the Department of Mysteries, a place filled with locked rooms containing dangerous experiments and classified research. In the Department of Mysteries, they found a room filled with shelves, holding thousands of small glass spheres. These were prophecies, predictions about the future made by true seers and stored in the Hall of Prophecy. Harry found the prophecy with his name on it, the one that had started everything, the prediction about the one with power to vanquish the Dark Lord. But it was a trap. Sirius was not there. Instead, Death Eaters had been waiting. They surrounded the 6 students, demanding that Harry give them the prophecy. What followed was a desperate battle. 6 students, none of them yet finished with their magical education, fighting against experienced Death Eaters who had no hesitation about hurting or killing children. Neville fought bravely, using everything he had learned in Dumbledore's army. He cast stunning spells and shield charms. He fought alongside his friends, refusing to run even when he was terrified, refusing to abandon Harry. During the battle, Neville faced Death Eaters who had served Voldemort willingly, who had committed terrible acts. At one point, he encountered Bellatrix Lestrange herself, the woman who had tortured his parents. She recognized Neville's name when she heard it. She taunted him, telling him she had had the pleasure of meeting his parents. The cruelty in her voice was unmistakable. She briefly subjected Neville to the Cruciatus curse, the same curse she had used to destroy Frank and Alice Longbottom. The pain was indescribable, worse than anything Neville had ever experienced. But even as he screamed, even as the curse tore through him, Neville remained defiant. He would not break. He would not give up. The battle raged through multiple rooms in the Department of Mysteries. Neville's nose was broken during the fighting, blood streaming down his face, but he kept going. At one crucial moment, he was holding the prophecy sphere, trying to protect it. In the chaos, the prophecy fell and shattered, destroyed before Voldemort could learn its full contents. Neville had not meant to break it, but in a way, his clumsiness had served a purpose. The prophecy could no longer be used by either side. Eventually, members of the Order of the Phoenix arrived, including Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and others. They took over the fight, battling the Death Eaters with skill and power the students could not match. But the rescue came too late for Sirius, who was struck by a curse from Bellatrix Lestrange and fell through a mysterious veil in one of the rooms, dying instantly. Bellatrix fled, and Voldemort himself appeared briefly, dueling with Dumbledore in the Ministry atrium before escaping. The Minister of Magic witnessed Voldemort with his own eyes, and could no longer deny that the Dark Lord had returned. Neville ended up in the hospital wing at Hogwarts, being treated for his injuries. His nose was mended, his other wounds healed. But what could not be healed was the experience of having faced Death Eaters, of having been tortured with the Cruciatus curse, of having encountered the woman who had destroyed his parents. That night in the Department of Mysteries marked a turning point for Neville. He had fought when it mattered. He had been brave when he needed to be. He had stood alongside Harry Potter against true evil, and he had not broken. When students returned for 6th year, Neville was different. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. He carried himself a bit straighter. He spoke with more confidence. The boy who had once seemed perpetually on the verge of apologizing for existing had become someone who took up space without shame. He was still Neville, still kind and gentle, still better with plants than with people. But the core of steel that had always been there, hidden under layers of insecurity, was beginning to show. 6th year brought new challenges. Snape finally got his wish and became the defense against the dark arts teacher, while former potions master Horace Slughorn returned to teach potions. Slughorn had his Slug Club, a group of students he considered talented or well-connected. Neville was invited to join, partly because his parents had been famous auras. At Slug Club meetings, Slughorn would talk about the old days, about knowing Frank and Alice Longbottom, about what a tragedy it was what had happened to them. These conversations were uncomfortable for Neville, but he handled them with more grace than he would have a few years earlier. In classes, Neville continued to improve. His marks in herbology were consistently outstanding. He achieved exceeds expectations in defense against the dark arts and in charms, proving he was capable in multiple subjects. He got acceptable in transfiguration, which was not brilliant but showed he could at least pass. His confidence in classes grew, and he participated more, answered questions more readily, stopped assuming he would always be wrong. Then, near the end of the year, Death Eaters managed to get into Hogwarts Castle. Draco Malfoy had been tasked by Voldemort with killing Dumbledore and had found a way to let Death Eaters through. When the alarm was raised, when it became clear the school was under attack, Neville did not hesitate. He grabbed his wand and went to fight. He joined Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna in battling Death Eaters in the castle corridors and on the grounds. The Battle of the Astronomy Tower was chaotic and frightening. Death Eaters were trying to reach Dumbledore, who was trapped on top of the tower. Students and Order members were fighting to stop them. Neville fought fiercely, using spells he had learned in Dumbledore's army, defending his school and his friends. He was injured during the fight, but kept going, proving repeatedly that he would not back down, would not run, would stand and fight even when the odds were against him. The battle ended with Dumbledore's death. Snape killed him in an act that would later be understood as far more complicated than it appeared. But at the time, it seemed like pure betrayal. Dumbledore was gone, murdered by someone they had trusted. The loss devastated the entire school. Dumbledore had been a symbol of safety, of wisdom, of hope. Without him, Hogwarts felt vulnerable in a way it never had before. During the summer between 6th and 7th year, everything changed in the wizarding world. The Ministry of Magic fell under Voldemort's control. Death Eaters and their sympathizers took over key positions of power. Attendance at Hogwarts became mandatory for all pureblood and half-blood students, though Muggle-born students were now required to register and prove their magical heritage or face imprisonment. Voldemort wanted control over the education of young wizards and witches, wanted to indoctrinate them into his ideology of pure-blood supremacy. When Neville returned for 7th year, he found that Hogwarts had been transformed into something dark and terrible, Severus Snape was headmaster. 2 Death Eaters, Amicus and Alecto Caro, were teaching. Amicus taught defense against the dark arts, which had been renamed dark arts and now focused on teaching students how to cast curses and cause pain rather than defend against them. Alecto taught Muggle studies, spreading lies and hatred about Muggles and Muggleborns. The Caros used cruel punishments on students who disobeyed, including the Cruciatus Curse. Harry, Ron, and Hermione did not return to Hogwarts for 7th year. They were on a secret mission to hunt down and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, the objects containing pieces of the Dark Lord's soul that made him immortal. Their absence left a leadership vacuum among students who opposed Voldemort's regime. Someone needed to stand up to organize resistance, to keep hope alive in the darkness that had fallen over the school. Neville Longbottom stepped into that role. Along with Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood, Neville restarted Dumbledore's army. They held secret meetings, taught students defensive magic, and actively resisted the Caros and their cruel policies. It was dangerous work. Students who were caught resisting faced torture as punishment. The Caros did not hesitate to use the Cruciatus Curse on children, but Neville refused to be intimidated. He had seen what Death Eaters did to people. He had lived his entire life with the consequences of their cruelty. He would not stand by and let them turn Hogwarts into a place of fear and hatred. Neville organized acts of defiance throughout the year. Students would sneak out at night and paint slogans on walls supporting Dumbledore and opposing Voldemort. They would sabotage lessons, refuse to practice curses on younger students, find ways to undermine the Death Eater regime at every opportunity. Neville became a symbol of resistance within Hogwarts. The shy, clumsy boy who had once been afraid of his own shadow had become a leader, someone other students looked to for guidance and courage. The Caros targeted Neville specifically because of his leadership role. He was subjected to detention after detention, each one involving increasingly severe punishments. They used the Cruciatus Curse on him multiple times, trying to break his will, trying to make him submit. But Neville would not break. He bore the torture, recovered, and went right back to resisting. His body was covered in cuts and bruises, evidence of the repeated punishments. His face was battered, but his spirit remained unbroken. At one point, Neville, Ginny, and Luna attempted to steal the Sword of Gryffindor from the headmaster's office. They believed Harry might need it for his mission, though they did not know the specifics of what Harry was doing. The theft attempt failed, and they were caught. The punishment was brutal, but even this did not stop Neville. He simply became more careful, more strategic, more determined. As the year progressed and more students joined Dumbledore's army, the resistance grew bolder. Eventually, the situation became so dangerous that many DA members had to go into hiding. Neville discovered the Room of Requirement could be transformed into a safe haven. He found that it could create a tunnel connecting to the Hog's Head pub in Hogsmeade, where Aberforth Dumbledore would pass food and supplies through to the students hiding in the room. By May of 7th year, most of the active DA members were living full-time in the Room of Requirement, only leaving for classes when absolutely necessary, spending the rest of their time preparing for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. Then, in early May, Harry Potter returned to Hogwarts. He arrived through the tunnel from the Hog's Head, and Neville was there to greet him. Neville looked terrible, his face swollen and cut, his body bearing the marks of months of torture and battle. But when he saw Harry, Ron, and Hermione, he smiled. He had kept Dumbledore's army alive. He had kept the resistance going. He had waited for Harry to return, and now the moment had come. Harry explained that he needed to find something in Hogwarts, a lost object of Ravenclaw's that Voldemort had turned into a Horcrux. He needed to destroy it to bring Voldemort closer to mortality. Neville helped rally students and Order members. Word spread that Harry was back, that the final battle was coming. Students who had fled returned. Members of the Order of the Phoenix arrived. Even some parents came, ready to defend the school and fight against Voldemort. As Voldemort and his Death Eater army approached Hogwarts, protections were raised around the castle. Professor McGonagall, who had taken command after Snape fled, organized the defense. Older students volunteered to fight alongside the adults. Younger students were evacuated for safety. Everyone prepared for battle. Harry gave Neville a crucial task. He told Neville that Voldemort's snake, Nagini, had to be killed. It was important, though Harry could not explain exactly why. Neville did not understand about Horcruxes, did not know that Nagini contained the last piece of Voldemort's soul that Harry knew about. But he understood that Harry was trusting him with something vital. He promised he would kill the snake. The Battle of Hogwarts began at midnight on May 2nd. Death Eaters and creatures allied with Voldemort attacked the castle from all sides. Students, teachers, Order members, and other defenders fought back with everything they had. Neville was in the thick of the fighting from the start. He used his knowledge of herbology as a weapon, manipulating Devil's Snare and other dangerous plants to attack Death Eaters. He dueled with confidence and skill that would have been unimaginable 7 years earlier. He helped transport injured fighters to safety during lulls in the battle. He encouraged other students, kept their spirits up, embodied the courage and resilience of Gryffindor House. During the battle, Neville dueled Fenrir Greyback, the savage werewolf who had attacked and killed numerous people over the years. Neville and Ron fought him together and managed to defeat him. Neville also fought Scabia, a snatcher who had hunted Muggleborns and other fugitives. When the bridge where they were fighting began to collapse, Scabia fell to his death, while Neville managed to escape. Then came the moment when everything seemed lost. Voldemort called for a temporary ceasefire. He gave those defending Hogwarts an hour to surrender and hand over Harry Potter, threatening that if they did not comply, he would kill everyone in the castle. During that terrible hour, Harry learned the full truth about the Horcruxes, including the fact that he himself carried a piece of Voldemort's soul. To truly defeat Voldemort, Harry had to die. So Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest and surrendered himself to the Dark Lord. Voldemort cast the killing curse at Harry, and Harry fell. The curse destroyed the Horcrux inside Harry, but did not kill Harry himself, thanks to complex magic involving his mother's sacrifice and Voldemort using Harry's blood in his resurrection ritual. But Voldemort did not know this. He believed Harry was dead. And when he returned to Hogwarts carrying what he believed was Harry's corpse, he wanted to display his victory, to crush the spirits of those who had dared to oppose him. Hagrid was forced to carry Harry's seemingly dead body. Voldemort's Death Eaters marched behind him. They approached the castle, and Voldemort demanded that the defenders come out and submit. People emerged from the damaged castle, exhausted, injured, grieving. They saw Harry's body and despaired. The Chosen One was dead. All hope seemed lost. Voldemort spoke to the crowd, offering them a chance to join him. He said that Harry Potter was dead because he ran when he should have stood and fought. He invited others to come forward and pledge themselves to the Death Eaters, to be part of the new world he was creating. The crowd stood in shocked silence. Then Neville moved forward. Neville stepped away from the crowd and stood alone before Voldemort and his entire army. He was unarmed, his wand broken during the battle. His face was bloodied and swollen from months of torture and one night of intense fighting. He could barely walk straight, but he moved forward anyway, limping toward the Dark Lord with his head held high. Voldemort recognized Neville's courage even as he mocked it. He said that Neville showed spirit and bravery, that he came from noble stock, that he would make a valuable Death Eater. He invited Neville to join him, to be part of his inner circle, to abandon the losing side and come to where power and victory waited. Neville's response was immediate and defiant. He said he would join Voldemort when hell froze over. He shouted Dumbledore's army, the name of the group that had resisted, that had fought, that had never surrendered even when everything seemed hopeless. His voice rang out clearly despite his injuries, a declaration that some things mattered more than life, that courage meant standing up even when you knew you could not win. Voldemort was furious at this defiance. He used magic to summon the Sorting Hat, the ancient hat that had sorted students into their houses for 1,000 years. He placed it on Neville's head and set it on fire, intending to make an example of him, to show what happened to those who defied Lord Voldemort. The hat began to burn, flames spreading across it and scorching Neville's head and face. Voldemort used magic to lock Neville's body in place so he could not remove the hat or escape. But in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Neville had proven himself, not just over the course of one night, but over 7 years of growth and struggle. He had shown bravery again and again, had stood up for what was right even when terrified, had led others when leadership was needed, had never stopped fighting even when tortured and beaten. He was a true Gryffindor, perhaps more than he had ever known. And the Sorting Hat, which was also once Godric Gryffindor's personal hat, contained magic that responded to such courage. Inside the burning hat, something materialized. As Neville reached up to pull the hat off his head, his hand closed around something solid and metallic. He pulled it out and found himself holding a magnificent sword. The Sword of Gryffindor, made of pure goblin silver inlaid with rubies, a 1,000-year-old blade that had once belonged to the founder of his house. The sword appeared for Neville because he needed it, because he was worthy of it, because in his moment of greatest need and greatest courage, the sword answered his call. At that same moment, chaos erupted. Harry had been playing dead, waiting for the right moment. Reinforcements arrived from Hogsmeade and the surrounding areas. The centaurs from the Forbidden Forest charged into battle. The House Elves of Hogwarts joined the fight. The battle resumed with renewed fury, and in the confusion, Harry threw off his invisibility cloak and revealed that he was alive. Neville, still holding the Sword of Gryffindor, had one task to complete. Through the chaos of battle, he searched for Nagini. The snake was enormous and deadly. Her venom could kill in seconds. Her bite had nearly killed Arthur Weasley years earlier. She had been encased in a magical protective sphere by Voldemort, making her nearly impossible to reach. But during the renewed fighting, that protection was disrupted. Neville saw his chance. Nagini was slithering toward Ron and Hermione, preparing to strike. Without hesitation, without fear, Neville ran forward. He raised the Sword of Gryffindor, an ancient blade imbued with the power to destroy evil. A sword that had killed the basilisk 50 years earlier and had since been soaked in basilisk venom, making it one of the few weapons capable of destroying Horcruxes. Neville brought the sword down with all his strength. The blade sliced through Nagini's thick body in a single stroke, beheading the snake cleanly. Nagini's body thrashed and then lay still. The last Horcrux was destroyed. Voldemort was now fully mortal, vulnerable, capable of being killed permanently. Everything that followed, Harry's final duel with Voldemort, The Dark Lord's ultimate defeat happened because Neville Longbottom had completed the task Harry had given him. When Voldemort died, killed by his own rebounded curse when the Elder Wand refused to harm its true master, the battle ended. Death Eaters were captured or fled. The defenders of Hogwarts stood victorious. They had won, but the cost had been enormous. 50 people had died in the battle, including Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and Colin Creevey. Many more were injured. Hogwarts itself was heavily damaged. But they had won. The Second Wizarding War was over. Voldemort was defeated permanently this time, his soul destroyed, his body dead. The dark period that had begun with his return 4 years earlier and had terrorized the wizarding world for much longer, if you counted his first rise to power, was finally, truly finished. And Neville Longbottom, the boy who had spent his childhood being told he was not good enough, had played a crucial role in that victory. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, Neville reunited with his grandmother. Augusta Longbottom had come to Hogwarts to fight beside her grandson. When she found Neville after the battle ended, she did something she had rarely done. She told him she was proud of him. Not that he should be like his father, not that he needed to do better, simply that she was proud. After years of disappointment and criticism, after years of Neville feeling like he could never live up to her expectations, she finally saw him for who he truly was and recognized that he had exceeded them in ways she had never imagined. The days following the battle were a blur of funerals, memorials, and beginning the long process of healing and rebuilding. Neville attended the services for those who had fallen. He mourned friends and classmates, teachers and order members. He walked through the damaged castle and saw the physical scars of battle everywhere, but also saw people beginning the work of repair, refusing to let the destruction stand. Neville's own wounds were healed by the skilled healers who had come to help. His broken bones were mended, his cuts sealed, his burns soothed. But he would carry scars from the battle and from the year of resistance before it. Some scars were visible on his skin, marks from cutting curses and burning spells. Others were deeper, the kind that did not show but changed you nonetheless. He had killed Voldemort's snake, had faced Death Eaters in battle, had been tortured repeatedly, had seen people die. These experiences marked him just as surely as any physical wound. But Neville had also discovered something about himself during that terrible 7th year and the battle that ended it. He had learned that he was capable of extraordinary courage, that he could lead when leadership was needed, that he could stand firm even when everything inside him wanted to run. He had learned that the Sorting Hat had been right all along when it placed him in Gryffindor. He belonged there. He always had. In the months following the war, Neville had to decide what to do with his life. Many of his classmates were facing the same question. They had missed significant portions of their 7th year education because of the battle and the chaos leading up to it. Some students chose to return to Hogwarts for an 8th year to complete their studies properly. Others moved directly into careers, feeling that their wartime experiences had taught them more than another year of school could. Neville chose to pursue a career as an Auror. It was a way to honor his parents, who had both been Aurors and had fought bravely against Voldemort's forces. It was also a way to continue the work he had started in Dumbledore's army and during the resistance at Hogwarts. The magical world still had dark wizards and dangerous criminals, and Neville wanted to be part of protecting people from them. He underwent the intensive Auror training program, learning advanced combat magic, investigative techniques, laws and procedures. He worked under the new Minister for Magic, Kingsley Shacklebolt, who was rebuilding the ministry with integrity and justice after years of corruption. Neville served as an aura for a period of time, though not for very long. He was competent at the work and dedicated to it, but he discovered something important about himself. Being an aura meant hunting down and fighting dark wizards, constantly dealing with violence and danger and the worst aspects of the magical world. After years of war and battle, after torture and loss and trauma, Neville found he did not want to spend his life immersed in darkness. He wanted something different. He wanted to nurture rather than destroy, to grow things rather than fight things, to spend his days working with life rather than death. So Neville made a change. He left the Aura office and returned to Hogwarts, but this time as a teacher rather than a student. Professor Sprout, who had taught herbology for decades, was ready to retire. She had always recognized Neville's exceptional talent with plants, had always known he had a gift that went beyond simple academic achievement. When she learned Neville was interested in teaching, she recommended him enthusiastically. Neville became the new Herbology Professor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Teaching was the perfect fit for Neville. In the greenhouses, where he had once been a student, finding his only area of confidence, he now guided new generations of young witches and wizards. He taught them about mandrakes and devil's snare, about gillyweed and Mimbolus Mimbletonia, about the thousands of magical plants that filled the wizarding world and all their properties and uses. He was patient with students who struggled, remembering his own difficulties in most classes. He encouraged those who showed talent, nurturing their abilities the way Professor Sprout had nurtured his. Neville became known as an excellent teacher, popular with students and respected by his colleagues. He made herbology interesting and accessible. He told stories about his own adventures, about using plants during the Battle of Hogwarts, about the time Devil's Snare nearly killed Harry, Ron, and Hermione in their first year. He showed students that herbology was not just academic, but practical, that understanding plants could save your life or help you in countless situations. His classes were always full, and many students who had not initially been interested in herbology found themselves fascinated by it under his instruction. Eventually, Neville became not just the Herbology Professor, but also the head of Gryffindor House. This was a position of significant responsibility, overseeing the students in Gryffindor, handling disciplinary issues, supporting and guiding them through their years at Hogwarts. It was the same position Professor McGonagall had held when Neville was a student, and he tried to live up to her example. He was firm but fair, expecting his Gryffindor students to live up to the house's values of bravery and courage, while also understanding that courage takes many forms, and everyone struggles sometimes. As head of Gryffindor, Neville could relate to students who felt inadequate or afraid. When a first year worried they did not belong in Gryffindor, Neville could tell them about his own doubts, about how he had begged the Sorting Hat to put him in Hufflepuff instead. When a student struggled with self-confidence, Neville could share his own journey from frightened child to capable wizard. He became a mentor to students who needed someone to believe in them, just as several teachers had believed in him when he needed it most. Neville also maintained close friendships with many people from his time at Hogwarts and during the war. Harry Potter remained one of his best friends, someone he had fought beside in some of the darkest times. They visited each other regularly, their families spending time together. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger were also close friends, as were Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood. The bonds formed in Dumbledore's army and strengthened in battle did not fade with time. These friendships remained important to all of them, a connection to shared history and mutual support. During this period of his life, Neville also grew closer to a young woman, he had known since his first year at Hogwarts. Hannah Abbott had been a Hufflepuff student in his year, a kind and gentle person who had also been a member of Dumbledore's army. They had shared classes for 7 years, particularly Herbology, where both had shown talent. They had fought together in the Battle of Hogwarts, but it was only after the war, as they both dealt with their own trauma and healing, that they truly connected on a deeper level. Hannah understood loss in a way many people did not. During their 6th year, her mother had been murdered by Death Eaters. Hannah had been pulled out of school and had missed much of that year, only returning for 7th year when attendance became mandatory under Voldemort's regime. She knew what it was like to grieve, to carry pain, to continue living despite tremendous loss. Neville, who had effectively lost his parents even though they still lived, who had grown up with the weight of their tragedy, found someone who understood that kind of complicated grief. They began spending time together, at first as friends supporting each other through difficult memories and healing processes. But friendship grew into something deeper. Hannah was drawn to Neville's kindness and strength, to the courage he had shown during the war, to his gentle nature that had survived despite everything he had been through. Neville was drawn to Hannah's warmth and understanding, to her own quiet bravery, to the way she made him feel accepted and valued for who he was. Eventually, Neville and Hannah began a romantic relationship. They took things slowly, both of them still dealing with the after effects of the war, both needing time to heal and find stability. But their relationship was built on a foundation of genuine friendship, mutual respect, and shared experiences that had shaped them both. They understood each other in ways that people who had not lived through the war could not fully grasp. After several years together, Neville asked Hannah to marry him, and she said yes. Their wedding was a joyful occasion, bringing together friends from Hogwarts, fellow Dumbledore's army members, and family. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of survival, of finding happiness after darkness, of building new lives in a world that was finally at peace. Harry Potter and his wife Ginny attended, along with Ron and Hermione, Luna Lovegood, and many others who had fought beside them. Augusta Longbottom was there, proud of her grandson and welcoming Hannah into the family. Hannah Abbott became Hannah Longbottom, and she and Neville began building a life together. By this time, Hannah had become the landlady of the Leaky Cauldron, the famous pub in London that served as the gateway between the Muggle and magical worlds. The pub was over 500 years old, with a long history and steady business. Hannah ran it well, creating a welcoming atmosphere for witches and wizards from all walks of life. She and Neville lived together in rooms above the pub, an arrangement that Neville's students at Hogwarts thought was particularly impressive and exciting. Living above the Leaky Cauldron meant Neville was connected to the broader wizarding community in a way he might not have been if he had simply lived at Hogwarts year-round. He could easily travel between the school and London, could meet with friends, could stay engaged with the world beyond the castle. The Leaky Cauldron saw all types of people passing through, from ministry officials to travelling merchants to families shopping in Diagon Alley. Neville and Hannah's home was at the heart of wizarding society in a very literal way. Their marriage was, by all accounts, a happy one. They supported each other's work, understood the demands of their respective careers, and made time to be together despite busy schedules. Neville would return from teaching at Hogwarts to find Hannah managing the pub with efficiency and warmth. They would spend evenings together, sometimes entertaining friends, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company in quiet domestic contentment. At some point, Hannah decided to pursue additional training. She retrained as a healer, learning the complex magical medicine needed to treat injuries and illnesses. This was challenging work, requiring extensive study of healing spells, potion making, anatomy, and diagnostic techniques. But Hannah was determined and capable, and she completed her training successfully. She then applied for the position of matron at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the person responsible for running the hospital wing and caring for sick and injured students. There was some gossip about Hannah's application and about the Longbottoms in general. Rita Skeeter, the tabloid journalist who had caused trouble for years with her sensationalized and often false reporting, wrote an article suggesting that Hannah and Neville drank more Ogden's Old Fire whiskey than was appropriate for people who would be caring for children. It was typical Skeeter nonsense, implying scandal where none existed. Most people ignored it, knowing Skeeter's reputation for exaggeration and invention. Whether Hannah ultimately got the position of matron is not entirely clear from historical records, but she certainly applied and was well qualified for it. Throughout these years, Neville maintained his connection to his parents. He continued to visit Frank and Alice Longbottom at St. Mungo's Hospital regularly, just as he had throughout his childhood. They still did not recognize him. They still had no awareness of who they had been or what they had done. Alice still sometimes gave Neville chewing gum wrappers in some instinctive gesture of connection, and Neville still kept every single one, treasuring these small, meaningful tokens from his mother. These visits were bittersweet. Neville had built a good life for himself, had achieved things his parents would have been proud of if they could have understood. He had become a hero in his own right, had helped defeat Voldemort, had become a respected teacher and head of house at Hogwarts. But his parents would never know any of it. They would never see him as an adult, never meet his wife, never understand what their sacrifice and their son's courage had ultimately achieved. It was a grief that never fully healed, a loss that continued even though Frank and Alice still lived. But Neville had learned to carry this grief without letting it crush him. He honored his parents by living well, by fighting against darkness, by teaching and protecting the next generation. He had proven that you did not need to be chosen by prophecy or marked by destiny to be a hero. You simply needed to choose to stand up when standing up was needed, to be brave even when terrified, to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. Neville also became godfather to Albus Severus Potter, the second son of Harry and Ginny Potter. When Harry and Ginny chose godparents for their children, they thought carefully about who they wanted in those roles. For their second son, they chose Neville, recognizing his importance in their lives and the qualities they wanted him to model for their child. It was a significant honor and responsibility, and Neville took it seriously. He was present in young Albus's life, visiting the Potter family regularly, being someone Albus could talk to and rely on as he grew up. When Albus was preparing to go to Hogwarts for the first time, he was nervous about being sorted into Slytherin. The sorting hat had told Harry years earlier that he could have done well in Slytherin, and Albus worried about what it would mean if he ended up in that house. Harry told his son about the two men he had been named after, Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape. He explained that Snape had been a Slytherin and probably the bravest man Harry had ever known. This conversation helped Albus understand that bravery and goodness were not limited to any one house. Neville, as a teacher and head of Gryffindor, would have been part of Albus's life at Hogwarts. He would have seen Harry's son sorted into Slytherin, despite Harry's attempts to reassure him that it did not matter which house he went to. Neville understood better than most that the house you were sorted into did not determine who you became. He had felt out of place in Gryffindor for years, before finally understanding that courage comes in many forms, and that the sorting hat saw potential in people that they could not yet see in themselves. As years passed, and Neville settled into his life as a teacher and head of house, he became something of a legend at Hogwarts. Older students would tell incoming first years about Professor Longbottom's role in the war, about how he had killed Voldemort's snake with the Sword of Gryffindor, about how he had stood up to Death Eaters and refused to submit even under torture. New students would look at the slightly round, gentle professor who taught them about plants and find it hard to believe he was such a formidable person. But then they would see the quiet strength in him, the absolute certainty in his classes, the way he never backed down when something was important, and they would understand. Neville did not talk about his wartime experiences unless asked, and even then, he spoke simply and without embellishment. He was not interested in glory or fame. He had done what needed to be done, just like so many others who had fought and many who had died. He did not see himself as special or extraordinary. He was simply someone who had found his courage when it mattered most, and that was something anyone could do if they chose to. In the classroom and in his role as head of Gryffindor, Neville emphasized the lessons he had learned through his own difficult journey. He taught students that struggling did not mean failing, that everyone had different strengths and weaknesses, that persistence and determination could overcome many obstacles. He encouraged students who felt inadequate or afraid, reminding them that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. He made sure students knew that there were many ways to be courageous, many ways to be a hero, and that every person had value, regardless of their academic performance or magical talent. Professor Longbottom became known for his kindness to students who were struggling. If a first year was homesick, he would make time to talk with them. If a student was being bullied, he would intervene firmly, but without humiliating anyone involved. If someone was having difficulty in herbology or just needed someone to listen, his office door was always open. He remembered what it felt like to be the student everyone underestimated, the one who seemed to be failing at everything, the one who felt out of place. He made sure no student under his care ever felt that way for long. In the wider wizarding world, Neville Longbottom was respected as a war hero and valued educator. He occasionally gave interviews about the Battle of Hogwarts and the resistance during his 7th year, though he always tried to emphasize the collective effort rather than his individual actions. He attended reunions of Dumbledore's army, gatherings where former members would reminisce about their time together and celebrate their survival and victory. These reunions often happened during Quidditch World Cup events, where many former DA members would attend together, bringing their families and introducing their children to the people they had fought beside. At one such event, the 2014 Quidditch World Cup final, Neville attended with Hannah. They sat in a VIP box along with Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Luna Lovegood, and other Dumbledore's army members. Their children, or in Neville and Hannah's case, their friends' children, played together. It was a celebration of normalcy, of peace, of the future they had fought to secure. They watched the match, cheered for their chosen teams, and enjoyed being together without the shadow of war hanging over them. Neville also travelled occasionally for his work with herbology. Magical plants grew all over the world, and understanding them sometimes required fieldwork. He went on expeditions to study rare specimens, to collect seeds or cuttings for the Hogwarts greenhouses, to consult with other herbologists about interesting discoveries. One such trip took him to Patagonia with Hannah, a region known for unusual magical plants. These trips combined his love of plants with the opportunity to see more of the world, something his childhood self, trapped in Augusta's home and consumed with self-doubt, would never have imagined possible. Through all of this, Neville remained humble and grounded. He had not forgotten where he came from or who he had been. The frightened, clumsy boy still existed somewhere inside him, a reminder of how far he had come and how much growth was possible for anyone willing to keep trying. He had transformed from that boy, not by becoming someone different, but by finding and developing the courage that had always been within him, buried under layers of fear and insecurity and other people's expectations. His story became an inspiration to many people, especially those who felt like they were not special, not chosen, not destined for anything remarkable. Neville proved that you did not need to be marked by prophecy or gifted with extraordinary power to make a difference. You simply needed to keep showing up, keep trying, keep standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. The ordinary could become extraordinary through determination and courage, and someone dismissed as clumsy and forgetful could become someone who changed the course of history. When people asked Neville about his greatest achievement, he did not talk about killing Nagini, or leading the resistance at Hogwarts, or becoming a respected professor. He talked about his students, about seeing young witches and wizards discover their own talents, about helping someone who felt hopeless find their confidence, about preparing the next generation to face whatever challenges might come. That was his legacy, not the single moment of pulling a sword from a burning hat, but the decades of quiet work building up others the way he wished he had been built up as a child. Neville's relationship with his grandmother evolved as well. Augusta lived to see her grandson become everything she had hoped for and more, though it turned out quite differently than she had imagined when he was young. She had wanted him to be like his father, to follow Frank's path, to live up to a specific standard. Instead, Neville had become himself, had found his own path, had achieved greatness in his own way. Augusta learned to appreciate this, to take pride in who Neville actually was, rather than who she had wanted him to be. In her later years, she often spoke with pride about Professor Longbottom, about his bravery during the war, about his work at Hogwarts. When Augusta passed away, Neville mourned her deeply. Their relationship had been complicated, marked by years of pressure and criticism, but underneath it all, there had been love. Augusta had raised him when his parents could not, had kept the family going, had ultimately been proud of what he became. Neville inherited the family home and various Longbottom heirlooms, becoming the head of the ancient Longbottom family. It was a responsibility he took seriously, honoring the family's history while also forging its future. As the years went by and Neville grew older, he remained at Hogwarts, teaching generation after generation of students. He saw the children of people he had gone to school with, taught the sons and daughters of former Dumbledore's army members. He watched the wizarding world continue to heal from the wounds of war, saw new challenges arise and be addressed, saw peace maintained through the efforts of good people, choosing to stand against darkness in whatever forms it appeared. Neville's life became a testament to the power of growth and change. He had started as a child crushed by expectations and trauma, someone who believed deeply that he was not good enough and never would be. He had been bullied by Snape, tormented by family members testing his magic, compared constantly to parents he could not remember and could never hope to equal. He had failed repeatedly, struggled in most subjects, been the butt of jokes and the last one picked for teams. But slowly, steadily, through small acts of courage and the support of people who believed in him, Neville had grown. He had found his talent in herbology and used it as a foundation to build confidence. He had joined Dumbledore's army and learned he could be brave even when frightened. He had fought in the Department of Mysteries and discovered he would not abandon his friends even in the face of Death Eaters. He had led the resistance during his 7th year and proved he could inspire others to stand against tyranny. And finally, in the crucial moment during the Battle of Hogwarts, he had completed the task that allowed Voldemort to be defeated permanently. His journey was not a straight line from weakness to strength. It was messy and difficult, full of setbacks and self-doubt. There were moments when Neville could easily have given up, could have accepted the belief that he was inadequate and always would be. But he kept going. He kept trying. And slowly, almost without realizing it, he became someone extraordinary. The story of Neville Longbottom is not really about destiny or prophecy or being chosen by fate. It is about choice. The choice to stand up to your friends when you think they are wrong. The choice to join Dumbledore's army and learn to fight. The choice to go to the Department of Mysteries even though you are terrified. The choice to restart the DA during 7th year, even though you know you will be tortured for it. The choice to step forward and face Voldemort, even when all hope seems lost. Every step of Neville's journey was marked by him choosing courage over fear, action over passivity, resistance over submission. And in the end, that made all the difference. Not prophecy, not destiny, not being marked by dark magic or chosen by fate. Simply the decision made over and over again to be brave even when bravery seemed impossible, to stand up even when you were shaking, to keep going even when you wanted to quit. Neville Longbottom became a hero, not because he was special, but because he chose to be. His legacy lives on in multiple ways. In the students he taught and inspired, who went on to their own lives, carrying the lessons he had shared. In the greenhouse at Hogwarts, where his successor continued the work he had done, nurturing both plants and students. In the memories of those who had fought beside him, who remembered his courage and determination. In the history books that recorded his crucial role in defeating Voldemort, and in the ongoing story of Gryffindor House, where future students would hear about the head of house who had once doubted he belonged there, but had become one of the house's greatest exemplars of courage. Neville's life after the war spanned decades, during which he continued to grow and evolve. He faced new challenges as a teacher, dealt with the normal struggles of marriage and adult life, experienced losses and joys like any person. But the core of who he had become during those 7 years at Hogwarts as a student, and especially during that final terrible year, remained with him. He was Neville Longbottom, the boy who became a hero, the student who became a teacher, the frightened child who became one of the bravest wizards of his generation. And when he was old and grey, still teaching at Hogwarts, or perhaps finally retired, still visiting his parents even though they had never regained their minds, still surrounded by the people he loved and who loved him, Neville could look back on his life with satisfaction. He had overcome his difficult start. He had proven wrong everyone who had doubted him. He had helped save the wizarding world. He had built a good life, done meaningful work, touched countless lives in positive ways. He had become someone his parents, if they could have known, would have been immensely proud of. But most importantly, Neville had proven something to himself that had seemed impossible when he was 11 years old and terrified in the Hogwarts Express. He had proven that he was brave, that he was capable, that he was worthy, that he was enough. The Sorting Hat had seen it from the beginning, that kernel of courage buried deep inside a frightened child. And over 7 years of growth and struggle, Neville had found it too. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, think about Neville Longbottom's journey. Think about how he started afraid and ended fearless, started clumsy and ended competent, started doubting himself and ended confident in who he was. Think about how he was, never chosen by prophecy, never given any special powers, never marked as destined for greatness. He simply kept trying, kept growing, kept choosing courage over fear, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Remember that heroism is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. It is about standing up even when your knees are shaking, speaking out even when your voice trembles, keeping going even when every part of you wants to quit. Neville Longbottom embodied this truth. He showed that the greatest courage is not found in those who never doubt themselves, but in those who doubt themselves constantly, yet still find a way to be brave. His story reminds us that we all have the capacity for courage within us, even when we cannot see it, that growth is possible for everyone, that change can happen slowly over time through accumulated small victories, that no one is beyond redemption or improvement, that the people who underestimate you, who tell you that you are not good enough, who compare you to impossible standards, are wrong. You are enough. You always have been. You simply need to find that truth within yourself, just as Neville did. Sleep well, and remember, you do not need to be chosen to be a hero. You do not need special powers or ancient prophecies. You simply need to keep showing up, keep trying, keep standing for what is right. That is what Neville Longbottom did, and look at what he became: a hero, a teacher, a friend, a husband, a godfather, a person who mattered, who made a difference, who changed the world. Not because he was special, but because he chose to be brave. And that choice is available to all of us every single day. Thank you for joining me on Sleep 2 Cinema. If you enjoyed this journey through Neville Longbottom's complete story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into your favorite characters and their journeys. Until next time, sweet dreams.